Hi, it's Nathan and Steve again. Been a while. My dad's just been having some tiredness issues.
Tiredness and too much on the honey-do list, so we had to, between the two, we just had to work it out. So anyway, sorry about that.
So anyways, we're not going to be able to look, due to time constraints, we're not going to be able to look at the top one, but I have a series of clips that I think would be interesting conversation points. This is the, I think this, let's start with this one. So this is roughly 14 minutes. This one ends around 31:20.
I'll go to a live stream in a minute. Yeah, I just want to show you guys some of the other videos and things that are caught up. Oh, this person's
about the LA riots.
She is a senator, I think, or a congressperson. I forgot which one. It's Maxine Waters. Let me read a few more. This isn't a protest. These people are attacking and destroying the building. Yeah, I think so too. And anyway, let Cali sink into the ocean. Well, I don't know about that. I swear a majority of people are just there to get footage, which is kind of weird too. Why can't they just say, what's so bad? Are they doing too? Yeah, I get that they're dads and aunts, but what about them being separated after years of progression and respect in the country? Well, it should have never happened. Like, just because somebody gets away with a crime for, like, and like, so if you apply this to another situation, right? Like, let's say somebody has been selling drugs for 10 years and they haven't gotten arrested, and then they finally get arrested for selling drugs. Can you use the logical argument that, well, because they didn't get arrested for this for 10 years, that now they shouldn't get arrested for selling drugs and, like, selling fentanyl, right? Don't come out selling weed, like actual hard drugs. This is insane. No, just because you get away with breaking the law for a long period of time doesn't mean that just at a certain point the law shouldn't apply to you anymore. Think about how bad that precedent is. Again, and this is the issue, is that I think logic and, like, this type of thinking and logic in general, this is a general, like, viewpoint that I have, is that logic that can be applicable to more situations is oftentimes better logic, and logic that is reductive and only relevant to certain situations is bad logic. And I think that inside of the circumstance that you've created, you think that this is good logic, but if you apply this to any other circumstance, you would immediately know that it's bad. No one's above the law? Yeah, of course, right? Where do these idiots come from? I think that a lot of people, and I have no problem with people that disagree and want to have a conversation about it civilly, right? I mean, like, that person that's, like, coming and insulting and being rude, that's different. But if somebody has an actual point of view or whatever, then that's going to be it. You're oversimplifying the issue. It's multifaceted. It's actually not. It's not multifaceted at all. The fact is that these people are coming over to the country. They are breaking the law. They know that they're breaking the law. They're doing it on purpose. And they had kids and they started a family, or they had a family and they brought them over, and they knew that this is what happens. So at a certain point, again, there is no other crime that we do that is like, oh, well, this person has a family, so they don't have to go to jail. This is ridiculous. Yeah, it's a ridiculous line of thinking, and it doesn't apply to anything else. Please bring it up. I'll debate you on this. I'm not interested in a debate or anything like this. So police officers in gear that makes a brick not deadly. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, right? Police officers are in gear that makes a brick not a deadly weapon anymore.
Are you stopping at any point?
Well, as soon as we get to the end of the clip.
Okay. All right.
Okay. They're also probably wearing bulletproof vests. Does that mean that you can shoot them with a gun?
Let's go back a little bit.
How could you possibly say something so ridiculous? The concussive impact is what really matters. Like, how could I don't even understand how a person would even think like this. What a ridiculous thing to say. I can't even fathom the type of thinking that these people have. I can't even imagine it. What a retard? Yes, it's insane.
Stop here where the guns are. So I want you all to take
you were wanting to say something?
Well, there's a lot of points. I guess I don't know, where do you want to begin here?
Well, why don't we start at the original point where I know you're against family separation, so why don't we start there with the whole thing? And he brings up the point of if they're bringing their child here illegally or coming in illegally and then having a family, what about separating them?
Where does he stand on it?
He's on the fence that if you're here illegally, you should be deported. He's not in favor of retroactive things, so if someone already has citizenship through birthright, he thinks that they should stay. Honestly, I think so as well, because it would be a load of wasted money and all that just to remove citizenship from people. But if someone is here illegally and they haven't started the process, he thinks they should be deported.
Okay.
And honestly, that's something I agree with.
Well, but I thought you were talking about family separation.
Yes, because what about the cases of, like, there's the case of the illegal immigrant coming here and starting a family and then being deported. And then there's also the case of the illegal immigrant coming here with a family and then being deported.
So, to my mind, there's so many points, there's so many issues here that a person could talk about. So for him to say it's not multifaceted blows my mind. But let's not get off the rails here. With regard to family separation, to me it isn't just a question of whether or not the family's deported or half the family's deported. That's part of the question, but it's not the whole. Because what happened in the first Trump term was that children were separated from parents before they were even, what's the word I'm looking for, processed as to whether or not they were going to be deported or not.
Yeah.
And so that was a can of worms. And so many times, this not being the first, so many times the statement is made that we're going to do this sweeping action regarding immigration, and then it's clear that all the details haven't been thought through, and they wind up causing all kinds of unforeseen consequences because they hadn't considered their actions. To me, that's immoral. It's not okay to say, well, we'll fix it later. That's not acceptable. And it appears that our legal system is incapable of dealing with those situations because at present it seems that more and more, if it gets all the way to the Supreme Court says, well, what can we do? In some way, shape, or form. And so
I don't follow that logic. Can you explain that?
Well, they're looking for technicalities. They're looking for ways to not deal with the issue if they can. So that allows the Trump administration to proceed with what they're doing, or and in some cases, I mean, there are technicalities that are important. For example, there was a case recently that was decided that said that a federal district court judge cannot put a injunction on an action of the federal government that would stay the action for the entire country because they don't represent the entire country. They're in a specific district.
Yes, they would lack jurisdiction.
Right. So, I mean, I get that. Okay.
I mean, that case doesn't really make sense to me either, because, of course, you follow the legal process. If that court, you have to follow the process, start at local or state, whichever it is, then keep moving on up until you get to a court that has jurisdiction.
Yeah. So if he had simply ruled that for this district this is not kosher, okay, appeal it to the Supreme Court, and then they can deal with it. And if they make a decision, then it is binding for the whole country.
Yeah, and even with the current Supreme Court decision to allow Trump's ban on birthright citizenship, states can still have their own birthright citizenship policies, from what I understand, but only for that state.
Well, that seems chaotic to me.
Welcome to the United States.
Yeah. And I understand the way birthright citizenship intersects with the problem vis-a-vis immigration. It creates a situation that upsets some people because you're granting citizenship to people born here, to peoples whose parents, or to the parents who have not been quote unquote gone through the legal process of immigration. Okay. And this gets back to a very fundamental point that he was taking issue with. It. He was saying that this isn't multifaceted. If he's going to make the comparison that you wouldn't let somebody off for dealing drugs who's been doing it for 10 years, you finally catch up with them, you just don't let them off. Then he says, well, why would you do it in this case, with the immigration case? Well, dealing drugs with the intent of exploiting others and risking their lives, I understand a law like that. I also understand a law that says there needs to be a regularized process to become a naturalized American citizen. What I don't understand is a system of application for citizenship that by design has nefarious consequences to it. Such as making somebody wait 2 decades or more to be able to even get close.
Well, is that nefarious?
Yes, it is, because let me finish. We could take in, I wish I could remember now. There were a handful of people from a particular country that supposedly were being, from South Africa, wasn't it?
I was wondering if you were talking about the farmers.
Yeah, that's right. And the evidence to me is not clear for their emergency need to be brought to this country. But if it is the case, let's say for the sake of argument, it is the case. Why can we make an exception for them, but we've got people coming over the border from our south whose situation is, I would argue, in many cases, no less dire, and yet they're told, get in the back of the line. If you and I were put in the position of people from certain areas of Mexico or Central or South American countries where this is an issue, where either you've got state-run governments that are oppressing the people and are not trying to help the people in having decent lives, or worse, are in cahoots with either drug cartels or other violent, nefarious groups, and either you can't make a decent living to support your family, or you're living in fear because of violence, random violence. To me, the natural instinct for someone who's got a family in that situation, run, go to safety, go to a place where you can live. Okay? Now, if we had a system that wasn't by design creating an incredible number of hurdles for people to get into the country, okay, and as long as they're being vetted, yes, we don't want violent people coming here. I get that, and to me that's common sense. But we make it an either or. In other words, we have to make the hurdles so high that nobody comes in because we're fearful that the wrong elements will come in, or we falsify the evidence and make it sound like there's this tremendous amount of crime that's coming over the border because of the open border, supposedly, which I dispute calling it an open border. Even in Biden's term or Obama's term, Obama, before Trump took it away from him, Obama had the record for the most deportations. So to me, there's got to be an element of realizing the dignity of the human being in the law. Yes, we need an orderly system, but for the vast majority of the time that this country has had laws on the books that have had anything to do with immigration, there has been at least some or much of the way that has been tailored to suppress certain groups of people and advantage certain groups of people.
Yep.
And how we as a country can allow this to continue, it's unconscionable. That's all I have to say on it.
And in the case of legal immigration, I would agree. In the case of illegal immigration, your first point was exploitation. I wrote them down just so I remembered. Your first point was exploitation. They were fleeing exploitation.
Fleeing exploitation, fleeing violence, fleeing poverty, all of it.
Okay, now let's flip that on its head. If they come in here illegally, are they not exploiting the U.S. taxpayer for places like sanctuary cities that are paying for hotels for these illegal immigrants? Are they not making someone else poor by taking a job? Are they not denying a citizen a house by renting or buying a place?
Well, this has been a canard for a while that American citizens are being displaced, but so many of the immigrants that come over are doing work that most Americans wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
And that is absolutely false.
Based on what?
There is. I know I sent you the news article through through text messages. I'll see if I can find it while we're talking. But there was a place that had. Oh, I think this was it. It was on Twitter on an account called Rapid Response 47 from NBC News. I circled it there at the bottom. And the quote is, "Every seat in the waiting area of Glen Valley Foods was occupied with people filling out job applications early Thursday afternoon, 2 days after the meatpacking plant became the center of the largest worksite immigration raid in the state." From what I read on that place right after the raid had to close for the day because they lost pretty much all of their workers. Mm-hmm. They were filled up by Friday. It's not the case that Americans aren't willing to do these jobs. It's the case of they're not being considered because companies like this are paying the illegal immigrants under the table and likely also exploiting them by paying them less.
Okay.
So, the idea that Americans are not willing to work certain jobs is just inherently false.
Well, I don't know. I guess you're bringing in factors that I wasn't counting on, but let's go here since you brought it up. If whether it's meat packers or large vegetable farms or other agricultural areas where it's been difficult, seemingly difficult to get labor to do the hard work, if they're willing to raise the wages, yeah, I think then people would do it. But they have to decide whether or not it's worth it. So how much of an increase? Do we know what the difference is in what the immigrant labor was getting paid versus the others?
No, but why would that matter? Because what you're saying is effectively we should have the illegal immigrants working for possibly under federal minimum wage as a shadow slave labor.
No, I'm not arguing for that at all. I would be very opposed to that. I would think it would make an important difference if living wages were attached to each job, and if they had to raise their wage to get people to work, then what that tells me is that the wages they were paying previously were not sufficient for anybody.
Yeah, because they were exploiting illegal immigrants so that they could pay less. And yes, the consumer was ultimately benefiting from that by having lower prices too. But that is now Asmongold here says he blames the companies more than the immigrants. I do tend to agree, but I think he's more like 70-30-ish on the company, where I'm more like 55-45, because the illegal immigrants are making the decision to A, come here illegally, B, work here illegally, C, most likely have either a fake or stolen license to be able to apply for that job, and and D, avoiding taxes while doing it.
All right, so you're hitting the exploitation that's going on in this country, and it's exploitation of the immigrants, and it's exploitation of the rest of us because they don't want to pay
Exactly.
living wages. I think there's legislation that could be crafted to deal with that problem that would not require however long the process takes, and seemingly it takes a very long time for immigrants to become naturalized American citizens.
And I agree with you there.
But let's talk about the piece where they're fleeing violence, they're fleeing, and so to come here to be exploited, they're still doing better here than they're doing where they were. Is the bigger point for them?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Which
so
is
leaving.
why-
Let me finish. So leaving because of violence, leaving because of poverty, leaving because they're being mistreated in serious ways. Again, the natural reaction of any human being to being in a situation like that is to flee to what is safe and habitable.
Yeah.
Okay?
The self-interest.
And why do we make that a crime?
Because they are not following our laws or respecting our culture.
Well, I don't know what respecting our culture has to do with it, but
Well, here's a... I'm forgetting the word now. An example. If someone comes... Let's say you invite someone to our house. They show up in a muddy pickup truck with muddy boots. They were just like out doing field work or something. They come in, you ask them to take off their boots so they don't track mud all over. They're still tracking. They decide, nah, I'm going to keep tracking all over. You say, hey, we're going to have this for dinner. You want to stay? They're like, nah. Start going through your fridge and start making whatever they want.
okay. So what's the equivalent to what you're describing there figuratively? What's the equivalent in the real situation?
By not following our laws, they are walking over us. By working under the table, or by forging documents or stealing documents, they are effectively stealing from the U.S. taxpayer and the local economies. I'm not saying immigrants don't have rights and should not be taken care of. My issue is solely with the illegal immigrants. We should you've heard my ideals before. We should have I'm forgetting the word, but I'm forgetting the exact word, but it's the only one coming to mind. Like an asylum, I guess. Not what I mean in terms of like insane asylum. Just like we should have these
It's got a different meaning. It's safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Sanctuary.
yeah, like a sanctuary asylum or something like that. Whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should have those along the borders that can house these people while they wait for their paperwork. They could get temporary work visas to go to places and be escorted by, say, a bus driver from those places to their places of work and back. That way we know they're not going off into the U.S. and doing things while we don't know about it. Like, there are so many ways we can definitely improve the system. My issue is we need to fix the immediately solvable issues first. Because even if we did follow through on my asylum idea, it'll take time and resources to build those. It'll take time and resources to hire people. It'll take time and resources to process them. So, and yes, we do need to 100% rework the U.S. citizenship thing so that it doesn't take nearly as long. Like, I could see a year or two. It should not take 20.
Well, I don't know why it takes a year.
Because you want to be thorough. Otherwise, you're gonna you open, like, if you have a net You want those holes in the net to be small so that the fish can't escape through them. That's why it has to at least take a good amount of time. 20 years is absurd.
Well, okay, so to my mind, just to use an example to make a parallel, when any of us gets a job, a new job, typically there is a period before which or after which you become regularized. In other words, you're on a temporary probation. I would think the same thing could be applied. And if you do something that causes a problem that would violate that probation, then you forfeit your right to come into the country.
This is just for the second point I was going to talk about. This isn't relevant to the current thing.
Okay.
Uh,
So this is picking up on the white South African
yeah.
issue, and what are you finding out here?
Didn't give me what I was looking for.
While you're looking that up, I just want to make another point, and this goes to how this is a multifaceted thing. Yeah, you can see everything in easy black and white, and when you're not in the middle of it, it doesn't have to be any more difficult than that. But when you have situations like we're currently in, where, and I forget what his position is, but I understand that it's this Stephen Miller, who is the prime driver of getting immigration enforcement, ICE, and other agencies working to fulfill a quota of making arrests of those who are not legal applicants or legal citizens.
Yes, and as the Supreme Court, I'm pretty sure it was a Supreme Court thing. I know it was in a court. I think it was the Supreme Court that said it was unconstitutional for any law enforcement to have quotas. So that is unconstitutional of ICE.
Well, that might be great. If that's been the ruling, I don't remember that having been made. But if, let's say for the sake of argument, it has been, the administration isn't acting like it's been ruled. They're sweeping up people left and right. Some who are citizens, and so it's not a situation where they're being careful in how they're doing the apprehensions.
Oh.
And in some cases, you've got individuals.
Okay, apparently I was wrong. I thought I heard differently on that.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that. So you've got individuals who get picked up who may have green cards and they get pulled, or you get people who are going to court following the rules of our immigration system at the hearings, who are getting picked up and said you're going to be deported. I mean, it's just the contradictions here are just so many. Trump ran on saying that he was going to get the criminals first. Well, that's not been the strategy. That's not been the execution of the plan. They're just rounding up whoever, and who would appear to be an illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
They're not being real careful if they should grab somebody who actually is a citizen or if they have a green card. Well, you got a green card, so what? The attitude seems to be, well, we'll send that information on up and we'll get you out of here, because we can revoke that or whatever, and so to my mind, the execution of this suggests that we're just not interested in any immigration at all, because we're not even trying. Yeah, we've got to fix some of these problems with making sure that criminal elements don't come into the country. I go along with that. But it's not as simple as closing the door. This guy here, he talks about it not being multifaceted. Building the wall has not been a black or white issue. Because even along the border of the United States with Mexico, you have landowners.
Yes.
And landowners, in every case, do not want this giant wall on their property.
Yes.
Now, they could do eminent domain, but I don't even get the sense of how that's going or what's happening there.
I think Trump has given up on the wall, because I haven't heard anything about it since his first term.
Well, the thing of it is there's details to every one of these policies. It's not just a cut black and white easy.
Yeah, there is details, but you have to look at the first detail. Did they come here illegally? If they came here illegally, they broke our laws. At least to me, that is a sign of disrespect. That they do not care about us or our culture. They only care about bettering themselves.
If you have children, and I'm going to say this, if you have children and you are struggling, you're not worried about whether a law is broken. You're worrying about taking care of your family. So I, who was born here, who have grandparents who came and who had to go through naturalization. But interestingly, I'll tell you a story. Your great-grandmother, Rancy, which is an unusual name for anybody who's listening. I said Rancy with an R. I've never heard anybody else name that either. She was born in this country, but because she married my grandfather in 1917, when the laws were such that if you married someone who was not a naturalized citizen, it wasn't the case that they were then fast-tracked because they married an American to become naturalized themselves. It was just the reverse. You, who were born here, have married a foreign national, and so now you are subject to their country. That's how it was. And my grandmother had to reapply for citizenship.
I've never heard of that.
Well, I know you've never heard of it, but that was a long time ago. Most people probably haven't, but I've got the documents to show you, because she had to be naturalized again. But so many of those laws were written so that Northern Europeans had the easiest time coming over, and peoples from other cultures in other parts of the world, or in this case in Southern Europe even, because the Italians were discriminated against. I would have thought the Irish were considered Northern European, but They took it on the chin. Um,
Okay.
the laws have not been very much written to where there is equal justice.
Okay, so yeah. I see, like, this was never covered in my history class in
Well,
high
I'm
school.
sure it wasn't, because I don't think most people are aware of this. You really would have to dig.
But of course, going by this, apparently that was the law because of the social norm back then, where apparently it was the woman's citizenship was tied to their husband or something like that. Their nationality defaulted to their husbands.
Yeah.
So in the case of a foreign woman marrying, they would get U.S. citizenship. In case of a U.S. born woman marrying a foreign national, they would lose their citizenship.
Well, there's irony for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So gender discrimination as well on top of that. So,
But the bottom line to me is I don't feel like I'm in a position to say somebody who is simply looking out for their family has committed a crime, especially when we've made it very, very hard for them to not commit the crime.
okay, counterpoint. A person is on hard times and has to provide for their family. So they start dealing drugs. Should they not be arrested and separated from their family?
Well, now we're talking about situations where asking the question, is it necessary to deal drugs in order to do that? I don't think it is. There are alternatives that can be of help to where people shouldn't have to do that.
Okay.
A lot of people turn to selling drugs because it's a quick buck, and they think they're smarter than everybody else, so they're not going to get caught.
Okay, and are there not alternatives to entering the U.S. illegally?
Well, I don't know where you'd go.
You'd go through the legal method.
Yeah, but the legal method is, and you've admitted this, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous and takes too long. That doesn't mean it's not there.
Well, it's there in name, but it's not. That's what I'm saying.
It's there in name and function. It's not preferable.
I don't call that functional. I'm sorry. To me, to argue that we've got to deal with illegal immigration without, at the same time, dealing with the problem that the system itself is so broken, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just, it's immoral, it's ridiculous. The axiom, whether or not you believe in God, is the golden rule. And, or put simply, love your neighbor.
And I'm gonna end this segment because I want to move on to the last bit, because we've been talking about this one bit for 45 minutes.
You bet.
The last thing I want to say on this bit is in regards to the South African bits. The South Africans did apply for asylum, so they went through the process and were brought over.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But
yes.
doesn't it seem like it's being expedited?
Oh yeah, that bit is more than likely discrimination on Southern applicants versus African applicants. That is more than likely discrimination of some form. But the question you asked back when you started was, why is it different for the South Africans that came over and the people coming from our south?
But
The difference is the South Africans applied and then were brought over.
Yes, but I suspect that the people who would apply for asylum coming over our southern border are still not going to get the expedited treatment that these people got. And, and therefore, to have the Trump administration, who is willing to expedite for some,
Yeah, that is
That is
100% discrimination.
Well, that and hypocrisy in the infinite degree. So anyway.
But yeah, the main difference is the South Africans applied, the illegal immigrants from our South did. The legal immigrants from our South
there are
did.
plenty that would apply, but again, the system isn't allowing the application to go the way it should.
Okay. Now, this clip is from yesterday. And I actually have to agree with what he says here very strongly.
And you can't do that.
People are arguing against this, or same that argue to keep the families together. They're contradicting their own arguments. No, their argument is that these are people who are motivated and that think entirely in the context of how things make them feel, and not in terms of like logical argumentation. So you should never really even you should not assume that they are coming to this conclusion from any sort of like a reasonable perspective. This is not a reasonable perspective to have at all. None of it makes sense. Those are people who are empathetic. So one thing that a lot of people, and this is the big problem with empathy, is that a lot of people's empathy turns out to hurt other people. And I think this is probably one of the biggest modern problems that we have, is that the basically like people's performative empathy ends up creating problems for other people instead of the people that they're being empathetic towards. So they're basically trying to make themselves feel good by helping one group of people, but in the process of that, they're hurting another group of people instead. So I view it as like concentric circles, and so obviously it's good to have empathy for everyone, but you should...
An example would be the prior one about illegal immigrants working and Americans losing out because the illegal immigrants were working those jobs.
Well, you gave me one anecdotal example. I would like to know what the total picture is, because I don't concede that that's the whole picture.
Well, from the article, it was pretty much their entire workforce.
At one business, yes.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the full picture? Is that across the country or across the region where this was happening? Or is this an exception to the rule, or what? To me, it makes an important point to know if we're dealing with a trend or if we're dealing with an exception to the rule.
Okay, but how do we prove that this is the rule and not an exception? By not deporting the illegals that are working those jobs so Americans have a chance to apply.
Well, I know people like to complain about government not functioning. And I want to say, by way of preface, that many times the people who are against government, who are in office, are trying to sabotage government from working properly so that they can there turn around and complain that, oh, the government's not working, we should get rid of this. If we had a properly functioning labor department, perhaps we'd have statistics that would tell us.
Okay, but there's also the counterpoint of we don't even properly fund departments like the IRS. And that would be the department that goes and finds the fraud and tax loopholes on the super rich that we all agree don't pay enough taxes.
Yeah.
So I get that I understand the idea that we need to properly support these departments.
I don't think it's an either or, though. I think it can be done with the proper priorities. But money talks today.
Yeah. Here's the example. Here's a great example of what I'm getting at. The gas tax. People absolutely hate whenever it's brought up that the gas tax could be raised. What they don't pay attention to, and this is the vast majority for certain, because it was even on networks like C-SPAN where this was happening, where people don't understand that the gas tax is there to put that money towards building and maintaining roads and infrastructure for roads. It's the same case with the departments. The people are generally not okay with spending money on these things they see as frivolous, but they don't understand the true purpose and value that we get out of them as a whole.
Well, and it doesn't help that you've got politicians that are saying it's your money, you know how to do better with your money. Well, yeah, people should be able to spend their own money, but we all have to contribute to the infrastructure of the country, or the country doesn't succeed. That's all there is to it. It used to be a patriotic thing to pay your taxes.
Yep. And it honestly should go back to being that way. Because without taxes, we would not have a government. And people are like, oh, well, then I could actually do what I want. No, because then we would go back to children working in coal mines. We would go back to children work. Now, this is a English example, not American. But we'd go back to kids cleaning chimneys when they're like 3 because they can fit. We would go back to those horrible times before regulation. There is a case for too much regulation being bad, but it is insanely worse to not have any legislation at all.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah. So, anyways, let's get to the rest of the clip. there. For context on the World of Warcraft example, the city of Stratholme got infested by a plague grain kind of thing, like plague infested grain or something. It was going to turn the entire city into undead because it was a new thing and there was no cure. As far as I'm aware in the lore, there's still no cure. So everyone that had eaten the grain, they were dead people walking. It was a matter of time until they turned. And Arthas was the crown prince looking, and he saw the situation. He saw the greater evil of, if I let these people be as they are, they will turn undead and then spread that plague further, along with destruction. He decided in the moment that he was going to purge the city of Stratholme for the greater good of the rest of his country, to prevent that further destruction. And his mentor, Uther, and his then love interest, Jaina, both turned their backs on him because they saw him as crazy. They saw the immediate evil act as worse than the soon-to-be wanton destruction of the land.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that. Now I'm gonna say this. Zombies aren't real.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. So why is it important for me to say that? Because all human beings are born with dignity by virtue of being human beings. Now, the actions of some, wrong, need to be dealt with, no question. But my fear with the example is that now we're talking about looking at some people as not human, and that bothers me.
In the video game story example, or something else?
Yeah, and applying that to a very human situation here.
But there is a real life example from history, the Black Death. When people contracted it, they were essentially exiled from their villages, and from, like, the Monty Python bring out your dead scene.
Well, that oversimplifies it. People were treated like they had dignity. Not everyone did that, but generally speaking, there were people who did. And there were people who risked their own lives to care for the sick. I have a sign up here. I found this in a catechetical, this saying in a catechetical material back when I was a Lutheran pastor. And the story goes like this. There was a fellow by the name of Muritas, and he had become sick with the plague, and he was in a hospital bed. And the doctors were talking about his condition, and they were talking in Latin, thinking that Muritas was a common person and wouldn't understand what they were saying. They didn't know he was educated. And so their crass discussion was, well, there's nothing we can do for him. He's worthless. And they wished they could off him, really. They weren't going to do that because they knew that was taboo. But because there was others that were earlier stages that they were hoping they could treat, or there was something maybe they could learn from doing an autopsy or whatever.
Okay, so this guy was. Oh yeah, you said he was sick with the.
With the plague, yeah. And so they called him worthless. And I know this is a religious reference, so I'll make allowances because I know there's going to be some disagreement. But his response, knowing that he understood what they said, he replied to them in Latin, and he said, "Call no man worthless for whom Christ died." Now, the reference to Christ there grounds human dignity in being created in the image of God. Meaning, we as human beings have an ability to have a sense of ourselves that no other creature on earth has. And we can have moral systems and so on and so forth. Even if you leave out, for your sake and the sake of others on our listening audience, all 5 of them, I don't know how many there are. For the sake of those who don't find that very useful, to have the religious connection, just understand that being a human being has the element of dignity within it, and that's why the golden rule is what it is: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So when we start to even remotely dehumanize a group of people, we're on a fast track to dismissing large numbers, thinking we're doing good, but we're not really doing good because we're not following the golden rule at that point.
Do you mind if I have a counterpoint?
Go for it.
So, again, of course, this is a thing pretty much every parent brings up to their kid if they're any form of good parent or not. Do unto others as you would do unto you. So, these people coming into our country illegally, taking jobs illegally, possibly stealing or forging documents, effectively throwing mud on our faces.
Well, I don't agree with that, but you're
That's
characterizing it as
that's
that.
the way
That's
I
the way
see
you
it.
feel. I get it. I don't agree with it.
Because I see it as disrespectful actions.
I don't think it's an either or. I think if we really worked at it, it's a both and.
Yeah.
And because
and that's where we agree. The difference is our approach. The issue is you want to do it all at once, and that's not feasible.
I don't buy that.
I think we need
If we
to
want
start
to
by
do it, if there's a will, there's a way. If we really want to do something, we'll do it in this country. You challenge the American people and say to them they can't do it, they will do it.
I don't believe in that.
Well, that's the history. That's our history. They thought Kennedy was screwy because he made a commitment to have man land on the moon by the end of the 60s. the promise. I want to say was in '61, maybe. Nobody thought that could be done, but we harnessed all our resources.
Yes, but that example doesn't work because that is the exact opposite situation. Kennedy said, "We can do this," and the country at the time didn't believe him. So it was the other way around in that case. The country was telling him no, and he was telling the country, "Yes, we can."
And your point is?
That example does not work the way you think it does.
Well, I fail to see your logic now.
But anyways, the way I view it is we need to be able to take care of ourselves first. Once we don't have homeless vets, once we don't have our citizens drowning in medical debt and student loans, once we have people that aren't stuck on the streets because there either isn't enough housing or the rent's absurdly high, then I am fine with trying to help my neighbor.
On its surface, that sounds great, but I'm going to tell you where the problem lies. Because, again, the religious reference, Jesus said, "You will always have the poor with you." Why did he say that? Because God likes to have poor people around? No.
I mean, technically, yeah, since he made them, but
Their poverty isn't his fault.
well, I mean, he made them and the situation they're in, so technically, yes.
Okay. We'll agree to disagree on that one, too. Because human greed, it gets in the middle of a lot of it.
Yes, but he made human greed, so.
No, he didn't make human greed. He
Well-
made human people, and he made them good, and they chose otherwise. Now, let's get off that rail for a minute. The point is the powers that be who exploit the system so that the haves have more and the have-nots have less. Love your answer. Because we're never going to solve the problem if we look at it as we got to do X first and then Y. Because their job is cut in half to now preventing you from doing X. And we can forget about Y.
Okay, but what about the other idea that while yes, they only have to focus on X, now I only have to focus on X as well.
But it's not just about you, and it's not just about me.
Yeah, it would be the whole
People
country
of the world, the people of the world are our neighbors. Now, when he talks about, okay, so you what is the old saying? Charity begins at home, right? Yeah. If
I've never heard that saying, but
it's old and you're not old, so no kidding. I get that.
I've heard plenty of old sayings. I'm in
Yes.
my 30s.
Oh, ooh, 30s, ooh.
Hey, by the time you're 25 in this society, you're old.
25-year-olds in most cases don't know up from down. Truth be told.
Yeah, but in the world of the young people, you're practically ancient at that point.
All right, we're nitpicking here.
Yeah.
Charity begins at home is a very old saying. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we use it as a crutch to say we can't be charitable with those who are not from our immediate family or are not from our friends or are not from our acquaintances or so on and so forth. And that's what though I'm sure many will take issue with me. To me, that's at the crux of this idea, America first. It's not America first, it's me first. That's the way it feels.
That's because it is.
They are the same, is what you're saying.
Yeah, America first is about me first.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
we need to care about ourselves and take care of ourselves.
I understand the frustrations of people who subscribe to that philosophy, okay? Because they are among the vast majority in this country who've been exploited by the haves for decades on end, and in many cases have had politicians sell them a bill of goods, and once they get in office, they don't do, or they can't do, because the system is bogged down because of all the hurdles that one has to clear in order to be able to get legislation passed to get the justice implemented.
Okay.
And so they're feeling unheard, they're feeling trampled upon, and so on and so forth. I get that.
Yeah. Time out for a quick second. You'll want to finish up your thought because it's almost
Okay.
time.
But I'm here to say it's not an either or. If we had people who didn't have a mindset of, well, I voted in November, now they need to do their job. They never do their job without the people putting the pressure on them.
Yes.
They never do. It's only when they're threatened with the possibility of being voted out of office that they start to do the right thing. Or when we get into a huge crisis and you've got just oodles of people, you know.
Well, not always the right thing, because usually when something happens, it's because a vast majority are screaming at it.
Well, yeah.
And
But
that's
it
not
takes-
always for the right thing.
It takes maybe not, but it takes a cataclysm to get government to move in a hurry in this country. Okay, that's my point. And so, since 1980, you could argue even since the late 70s, more and more the government has been, and this is a problem for both parties, has been enacting laws benefiting the few on the backs of the many.
Yeah.
And until people rise up, I don't want a revolution. But I do want people holding their people accountable and stop falling into the tribalism that we have today.
Yeah.
And that's enough. I don't need to go any further.
Yeah. I'm gonna call it there. So.
Okay. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.